Good afternoon. I'm calling to order the, what's the date today? October 10th meeting for Environmental Matters Committee. For the record, all the members are present. And let's see, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
His mic is off.
Your mic, Ross's mic is off.
So moved.
Second.
We have minutes from September 12th. Is there a motion?
Move approval of the minutes from
Second.
September 12th meeting.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Appointments, am I looking at the right thing? Yeah, appointments and reappointments. Appointment for Mr. Aaron McCready. I think this was on our last agenda, wasn't it?
It
No,
was,
it was?
yes, it was, but he didn't show, and didn't show. I sent the invitation.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll move postponement of the appointment.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And could you just ask, I guess, let Mr. Raftovich know if a person has problems attending, it might be difficult for some people. Would they be willing to join us virtually? That would be a good option.
Okay.
And next up,
We can do it, meeting. You hear it? What's it? The whole meeting.
This is interesting.
What is that? The recording?
You can hear yourself, Rob.
past delay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, it's Facebook Live.
okay. So there's a delay of like a minute or so?
Yes. It's
Sorry for the technical issues. We're going to jump into legislation. First up is O2623, which is Forest Conservation Plan Appeals. And I know there may be some interest in postponing this, but I at least want to provide some background for the committee again, maybe go over, I do have a sponsors amendment. This legislation, what first spurred this is I wanted to work in some text that would say if there's an appeal that the staff will put a stay, will basically not approve the permit until the appeal is settled, because I wanted to make sure the trees weren't cleared before the appeal was determined. I also added to that removal of, at the time, what was an old exemption for planned unit developments that were approved prior to a certain date, and that's no longer, at the time, was no longer valid, so I was going to remove it. And then when that went to the Planning Commission, it took a while to get to them because of some, I guess, oversight of staff's part, but when they got their comments back to me, I realized I needed to make even more changes. And so what the Planning Commission recommended to me, which is reflected in this amendment, is that we needed to overhaul the overall appeals process. And so they were recommending that, you know, in the Forest Conservation Act, the first document that gets reviewed is the forest stand delineation. And that's what maps out the forest, what's on the property. So that sets the whole tone for the entire project. That determines where things are supposed to get built or not built. And so it's really important to get right. And so the appeal process in the current code wasn't very clear. Planning Commission thought that appeals of that document should go to them, because if they hear the overall package, the development project, they felt like they should be aware of any kind of issues that the public may have.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you're saying they, meaning the Planning Commission?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
And so in order to enable that, I had to make a couple other changes and to change the Planning Commission code to give them the ability to hear these appeals. So they would hear appeals of the forest interlineation, and then once that's settled, they will get the complete development package like normal. The other document that this adjusts the appeal process on is the preliminary forest conservation plan. So that's the second stage. First is the forest interlineation, and then they put together their preliminary forest conservation plan. And that document, we changed the appeal to be, basically there's no city appeal. That would go right to the circuit court. And the reason is because if people want to appeal it, they can go testify, or if they have concerns about it, they can go testify to the planning commission. And if they feel like they need to appeal it, then they would have to appeal it as a part of the entire package to the circuit court. And then we made a clarification on the final forest conservation plan that also removes the city appeal and has it go right to the circuit court, because that's later on in the process. So those are the main changes to the appeal that were made. That's on page, let's see, 5 of the amendment.
You're not recommending striking it all?
No.
This is on page 1, 40 through 44, all of page 2, all of page 3, all of page 4, and the lines on,
Well, I think that's because this is the sponsor amendment, so I'm basically substituting out the original text in the legislation.
but I can't follow what's getting substituted in. On page 1, line 40, we strike paragraph B. I don't even see a paragraph A in the legislation is struck.
Could I ask for clarification to what Alderman Arnett is saying? So on page 1, lines 40 through 44 strikes the title, the division 5, the section, and B. Is that correct? I'm looking at page 1 of the legislation. Is that what we should be looking at?
I think, so again, I think what this does, the original legislation is 5 pages long. The way it's written by a law office is that they're essentially striking the entire original legislation and text and replacing it with what we have written down on pages 4 of the amendment on.
But that's not what we see in
That's the original.
Alderman Arnett, is that what you were questioning also?
I mean, it seems to me like it's striking the whole thing, which I don't know how you do that. It's striking the entire of Division 4 all the way through, so it's striking all of the legislation as submitted.
Okay.
But I can't figure out what it's substituting.
What it's substituting is page 4 of the amendment. Of this amendment in your hand.
So page 4 of what?
Of the amendment. We'll go to page 4 of the amendment and you'll see this is how it's going to read. This is how the legislation would read.
So, but I see all that strike-throughs also. So
Yes.
under application, the language will begin with 21.71.030 application?
Yes, that's correct. So this is current code that I'm going to be proposing to alter.
So Title 21, Planning and Zoning title goes away?
No, that's still there. It's just number 12 and 13 get stricken.
I'm looking at lines 40 through 42 in the original. So these 3 lines actually stay.
The whole, oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
And then we pick up with 21.71.03, but it begins with application and then A or 12, a real estate transfer. I'm following
So
your,
if you look at the page 4 of the amendment, you see all the header.
Right.
Header 21. This is what the legislation is going to look like if it's amended.
okay, so we're not striking 40 through 42.
I don't know why they have that written.
And we
like that on the
begin
motion.
with not B, but with 12 on page 4 of your amendment.
What does 2171-030, capital letter A, say? Is in the current code, this starts off with B, this chapter does not apply. What was A? Look at the legislation.
That's getting.
There is no A in the legislation. It begins with B.
Yeah, the legislation, this is what the legislation is going to be. It gets substituted.
I have to say bluntly, I can't possibly work with this unless I can go back and see all the original code, including whatever A was that isn't in the draft legislation.
Letter A.
Yeah, because it's on line 44,
Well,
we have line B.
impacting that
Can you
section
pull
of
up the
code.
original
I know,
ordinance, or
but
the
what
original
does that
code,
section
section of the
say?
code?
Well, I think that's what I was trying to
1623.
simplify, because if you want to see the entire chapter, it's going to be a 20-page piece of legislation. This tries to keep it concise and,
But the Alderman makes a good point. There is no A, there is a B, but according to your amendment, it begins with 12
everything-
because we strike through everything else.
everything in the current legislation is going to be stricken. And
Right,
it's going to start with amendment, section 212730 on page 4.
Right.
At number, it's going to start with this striking 12 and 13 and renumbering the rest.
so we begin with, that's what I'm saying, 12.
Well, we have to begin with this because it's striking.
Well, but
From the
forget,
code.
where do we really begin with what you want, which is 12? You're going to strike this all
Yeah.
out, so you're beginning with 12. Right? These don't exist anymore, even though we don't know where
Well, if-
11, 10, and
if
all
it-
those are.
If the amendment passes.
Right. But that's what I'm trying to get clarification on.
So I would be happy to work with this, but I cannot do it without the whole code, because I'd like to see what 2171-010 says, 020, and then try to figure out what's getting wiped out for 030. Is there an 040 and 050 that is still in code?
What are you looking at? 030, 050?
Here's 030, and then we jump
Yes.
to 060. Does that imply that 040
This-
and 050 stay the same?
Yes. I mean, we
But
can't.
I can't
The
get it-
entire Forest Conservation Act is going to be like 50 pages. It make no sense to have that whole thing be in legislation. This only deals with the sections we are changing.
And what I'm saying is, it's hard for me to figure it out without the context of the whole legislation. I'm not saying put it here, but what I would need is the current code. I didn't bring my code with me. And so it's really hard to figure out what's happening. Why are we getting rid of this chapter does not apply to?
So this is the list of 217130 is a list of exemptions to Forest Conservation Act.
Okay, and now there's
And so
not going to be any
let me-
exceptions.
No, there will be, because this is a list of, I'll try to bring it up here. It's a list of probably about 20 or so.
I regret my words to you in my text that this was going to be very simple because we're only looking at those pages, those changes on page 5, which I agreed with. 2 changes from Building Board of Appeals to Board of Appeals, and I forget what the other one was. But now there's
That's still all that's being changed for the most part. So if we
Well-
look at,
6.060 is being changed also, even though in the
20
second paragraph, it says it's only 030 and 070. And again, this goes back to the original legislation, so it's
so
outdated, I guess.
I guess the question, we need to get this drafted in a different way that's going to make sense to the council. Section 2171030,
Yes,
the title is called application. It
and that's
says,
staying the same.
no, but it says,
No.
no, but that's what's listed below. All these numbers are underneath that section that are going to get changed. So
No, 030 is still going to be application, and 060 is going to be forest stand delineation.
yes.
So I'd like to know what 010, 020, 040, and 050, and I don't
Why?
have
We
that.
have, we also have 045, 050, 060,
I know, and I'd
070,
like to see
080,
how-
100,
so that
110,
you can
120,
understand.
That's what he's
130,
asking
140,
about.
150, 160, 170, 180, 190, 200.
Yeah, I know, but
I'm not adjusting the entirety of the Forest Conservation Act. I'm only impacting the application and the appeal process. And those, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections of that out of the 20 or so. I don't think it makes sense from a legislative standpoint to list the entirety of the code.
I couldn't agree with you more. What I'm saying is, for me to analyze this new piece of paper, I would go back, pull out my zoning book, and look at the entirety of this section. But I see here now, we're also changing the planning commission, 2108030.
Yeah, as I explained in my intro, the planning commission is recommending that appeals of the forest and delineation go to them because they hear the overall development package. They didn't think it made sense to have the appeals go to a
They
different
don't
body.
have appellate parties.
That's why I had to change the code to give them appellate powers over this particular one document, one decision. Because I did see the wisdom in, if their point is, if we're reviewing the development application and there are issues or concerns with it, they want to know.
Okay, so I'm not trying to be quarrelsome. What I'm telling you, I view the role of committees is to take the deep dive and figure out all these moving parts so the rest of the council doesn't have to. And all I'm saying is, for me personally, this out of context without having all the code that's staying and the flow, and then seeing what's staying in 04, 05, and then we jump to 217170. So there's 080 all the way through 0160. And I just am saying, I wasn't prepared to vote on this because I hadn't done that analysis of the new flow of the amendment. But I am also wanting to think about mixing apples and oranges and giving appellate powers to the planning commission.
Well, it's not, it's not mixing apples and oranges. It's, again, their logic made sense to me. I was going to go with the building board or board of appeals, zoning board of appeals first, but they said, why would you have appeals go to this other body when they're not hearing the development application?
Because of the different people that populate the two bodies. So Board of Appeals tends to be mostly attorneys. And I think those are much more the right people to have on appellate functions. The Planning Commission is a mishmash of a whole bunch of people, but tend to be more focused on planning, not appeals.
Well, the forest stand delineation is it's not a legalese. It's an environmental assessment done by environmental scientists. That is where, frankly, there's no body that has the appropriate staff to be hearing those concerns.
Yeah, and before it went to the building board, which
But the
also
only-
didn't have the right people.
Well, no, before it didn't go anywhere. And that was the problem. People had to wait until the end of or middle of the process to launch an appeal. I'd rather get this settled early on in the process. And then I think that's better for developers and public. So I don't know, what do you need at this point?
More time, to be honest with you. Because I didn't have this, so I was trying to, I really thought the whole thrust of this was just on page 5 of the changes that are made in red. And so, what is the role of the planning commission in forest stand delineation in plans? They approve the plans, right?
The planning commission?
Yes.
They approve
When they're approving
they
a plan
approve the forest
development.
conservation plans when they
Right.
approve the development plan.
So I just don't feel like it's appropriate to have something being appealed back to the very body that made the initial ruling.
Well, it's not. The forest conservation plan would not be appealed to them. It would be appealed to the circuit court. That's what I'm changing. It would go to the circuit court for the conservation plan, but the forest delineation would go to them.
This says hear and decide appeals of approved forest stand delineation.
Yeah, that's different than the forest conservation plan.
Alderman, give us the order.
Forest stand delineation gets submitted first. That is, maps out your forest, what needs to get protected. Then the preliminary forest conservation plan gets submitted, and that maps out, it talks about how you're going to protect that forest that was mapped out earlier and where you're going to put the houses to protect that forest. And those are the two main documents that are going to be going to, the first one, forest delineation goes to staff.
Yeah, so the department approves the forest
And
stand.
if somebody wants to appeal, what I
All right.
propose is to have that go to the planning commission. Once that forest delineation gets approved, they put together their full development application, and that full application would go to the planning commission, and that would include the forest conservation plan.
So it goes back to the planning commission, is what you're saying, or what you're
No.
proposing.
No, that would be the first time unless it was appealed. So
And who has standing to appeal?
the way I worded it was it's anybody who lives in the city or an environmental organization that is within a city watershed.
And can we ask Ms. Reuter, is this consistent with the state code definition of duties for the planning commission? They can do that under their state authority? They can hear an appeal of an departmental decision?
So the state law sets appeals bodies, duties generally, and then they have like must-haves, must-do in there, and the city can go beyond that, I believe. That would be actually a law question.
It is, and that's why I'm asking you to, because my reading of all of this stuff when we're reviewing standing is that the planning commission doesn't have appellate powers. It's the appeals board and the board of building, the zoning board of appeals, which is what it called at the state level, and the building board of appeals are the two bodies that have appellate power under state law. So it feels to me like we're giving an appellate power to the planning commission that is not authorized in the state,
Ross, move your mic to your mouth, please.
is not authorized in the state legislation. So the question, I mean, I understand the logic of it now that I'm getting into the flow of the thinking here, but I'm not sure we have the authority to give them appellate powers that are not prescribed for them under the state code, state land use code.
Look, I mean, that's a completely valid and good question. What's frustrating is I've asked the law office that. The planning commission came out with their decision months ago. And I've asked the law office for this, and at first they said, well, we just didn't like it. So. with that,
I hear your frustration and often share it, and I am desirous to get this loophole
Well-
closed, so I'm not trying to be a troublemaker,
No,
but I am
that-
trying to
that's
do the
fine.
deep dive.
That's fine. I mean, I was trying to respond to the planning commission's recommendations. But frankly, it's not my top priority is just making sure that if there's an appeal, that the forests are not cleared. So, I mean, if
Let me ask you a
the
different question.
committee wants to go back to the original legislation, then
Yeah.
that's
So
fine.
I first of all, I thought the planning commission's explanation was fairly light. Wasn't very many paragraphs. And secondly, they are a recommending body to us on legislation. If we didn't change it the way they're talking about changing it, but did it the way the original legislation is written, what we do is close the loophole. We don't necessarily listen to the counsel of the planning commission, which sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I kind of understood the flow of the legislation as written, and that is why I focused on the things that are in red, because that's what's changing. And I liked
Right.
those red changes. The planning commission, I think, particularly getting into defining new roles for the commission itself, I want to know more about that. So I'm kind of loath to change it. I think the Board of Appeals, the reason it went to the Building Board of Appeals, by the way, is because it had to do with construction, which I don't think our Building Board of Appeals, I mean, they're not doing plumbing questions and things like that. They're doing fences on South Annapolis Yachting Center, which I don't think is the right assignment for
Well-
them. But the Board of Appeals does look at zoning matters.
I was also trying to address, coming out of the planning commission, some other issues with the appeal process in that, again, the way it's currently worded in the code is that the forest and delineation and the conservation plan are deemed complete and correct, not actual approvals. And that makes it difficult to appeal and get corrected.
Yeah.
Because it's arguable whether or not it's an administrative decision or not that can be appealed. And the problem with that is then you don't get to the end of the project until somebody can actually appeal, and it can really muddy up the works. I was trying to create this new procedure for appealing the forest and delineation, because that
I thought you
sets
did.
foundation, not in the as written, in the amendment I did. But
I thought as written-
it doesn't impact that.
I thought that was one of the changes, was going from the Building Board of Appeals.
Well, yes, it changes it from the Building Board of Appeals to the Board of Appeals,
Right. Which I think,
which,
I find appropriate.
well, yeah, and it needs to get done because this section of code is within the Board of Appeals jurisdiction, not the Building Board of Appeals. It's in Title 21. The Building Board of Appeals is only Title 20, or Title 17. So I guess the question for my colleague, would you be more comfortable with the original legislation as written?
I'm not sure. I still have a question about who's got standing.
Well, that would not be addressed in the original legislation.
Well, then I would like to see it addressed in this legislation, because according to what you said, anybody has standing to appeal
In my amendment,
in your
the original
amendment.
legislation does not address standing.
Standing at all?
We'd stick with the current practice. Let me
Oh, I have
let me
to go
double
back.
check.
I mean, how long, I served on that committee for, seemed like years.
Well, and I mean, that too, I proposed changing in the amendment because I do think some of our standing laws are too strict. It's people who live within 200 feet. Well, an environmental organization has a direct interest in the health of the watershed, the health of the water body. So should they be denied if simply because they don't live within 200 feet of the development project, even though they have a direct interest and impact on?
No, there are some organizations that have demonstrated an interest, a true interest. There are others who come into existence for the sole purpose of stopping a project, and we have one in the pipeline right now, which we've heard from our residents for the last 2 meetings about.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to the city attorney about how to address that, and he's convinced that we can.
We can't?
We can.
Oh,
We can address it because it is unfair and inappropriate that anybody be allowed to weigh in when we don't even have standing on some things, and to just wholesale, give anybody.
Well, I think it's a related tangent, but in that case,
I'm not on a tangent. I could be on a tangent if you like that. I could escalate it.
no, but in that case, though, I think even though I disagree with what the organization is doing, it's completely legitimate because a number of the people live right next to the property in question. So you can't say, there's no way we can adjust the law to say they can't do that in the future because that's.
Well, let me just say that they have been negotiating for the last 15 years, and all of a sudden, it's a problem.
I know, but that's
the
legal process. People have
Well, and that's-
to
but within a certain timeline,
Cynthia.
so.
and they met the timeline. That's.
No,
I mean,
they
I don't
haven't.
agree with them, but
They haven't.
they have that right to do it.
Well,
I mean,
according to our code right now, and that's what needs to be changed.
I have a better answer on the Planning Commission's, the ability to appeal to the Planning Commission versus the Board of Appeals. On the Planning Commission, you're not really appealing to the Planning Commission. You are asking them to reconsider their decision or recommendation
Of the director.
of the director or what they did. You can ask them to reconsider. And so it's not technically an appeal. And if you don't like the decision that was made by the director or the Planning Commission, then you go to the Board of Appeals and you appeal directly to them.
I don't think you do go to the board. I think you have to go to circuit court.
Well, after the Board of Appeals, then Circuit Court.
yeah, that's right. Well, except for, yeah.
So.
Well, it depends on the.
We do have legislation going on of parallel tracks, and the other one is the work that Rob and I are doing to try to get, can't use the word standing, but the ability of the elected officials to represent their constituent on land use issues. And there's a redraft of that now from the making us ex officio members of the appellate bodies?
Correct. It's still a work in progress.
Okay. So the standing issue, but unfortunately, I think Rob is correct that because those people live within a certain distance, some of the people in the Crab Creek Confederacy, Confederacy, whatever they call themselves.
You know what this is.
Yeah.
You know exactly what this
No,
is.
I know.
We don't even have
I
to
do
say
too.
know,
The
but
same thing I'm facing with the Eastport Shopping Center. Long ago, I felt that was properly, I mean, I didn't like the decision, but it was properly handled by the planning staff, the planning director, and in the appeals processes many times over, and yet it continues. And so it is a fact of our system that people can be obstreperous and.
It's not obstructionist, it's checks and balance. It's completely legal
Yeah,
within their
no,
means.
I hear you.
It's not, I
I
don't
try to
think we
tell
should be.
myself that every time I. By the way, I thought Steve Rogers had a good email
I
today.
thought they were-
I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
So, I have to say, my main interest is to get this fixed. I don't have strong feelings about going with the legislation as submitted. and considering but not following the planning commission's recommendations. On the other hand, if we can in fact give appellate type authorities, the land use code establishes the commission and the planning director. That's the primary thrust of it. The appeals board of building, the zoning board of appeals and the building board of appeals are all in that same body. But the main thrust was that local jurisdictions have these planning functions and these planning checks and balances. If we give the planning commission the power to look at the planning director's decision on forest stand delineation, I'm fine.
I think one of the things I'm concerned about is timelines. I mean, as we can see, it took the planning commission, 10 months to get to this original legislation. And, other jurisdictions managed to put timelines into their codes so that people on either side are not being held, I don't want to say held hostage, but being delayed. What Mr. Lyles and I had talked about was people paying for appeals. If there's an interest in making an appeal on something, particularly that has been in the works for some time, then who bears the brunt of that cost? Usually it's the developer, and I know some think that that's appropriate. There are many others who don't think that's appropriate, that the person who wants to delay it and cost everyone else should be the one who pays the price. I mean, we had a woman come before us at every single meeting, beating us up, I'm going to just say it, about a development that we could not move. And it wasn't us particularly, but our departments, the planning commission. But the timeline is just ridiculous. And I know that's deliberate, but it's not appropriate, it's not professional, and it's not necessary. So how do we address that?
Well, I'd rather have that conversation another time. I say that because I'd like to see if we could at least come to an agreement on the original legislation, and I can walk you through that.
I
you
was
look
good with that.
as written, as posted in Legistar.
Can I draw your attention, though, to this? Is this where the forest stand delineation is made? Because this is the flow.
No, that's just general status for all the forest
So I'm trying to
documents.
answer Alderman Finlay's point.
Well, I don't want to, we still have to get to some other stuff. So looking at the legislation as written, if you go to page 3, line 30, I was proposing to strike. This is, so if you start at the, sorry, I should say at the top, it's a list of exemptions to the Forest Conservation Act.
Right.
So this removes number 13, which is planned developments prior to the effective date of this chapter. And so the date of this chapter is, gosh,
A long time
a
ago.
long time ago. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago when we first adopted by citation the Forest Conservation Act. So, and then when you were on the task force, I think, Alderwoman, back in 2016. And so if there's anything that's older than 2016, and again, I don't think there is, with the exception of one in your ward that did have approval.
Oh, I think that's a different issue. I believe, I could be wrong. The one in my ward had approval that dated back to 2006.
Oh, and that wasn't the planned unit development, was it?
Yeah,
It was.
it was.
Well, they complied with the Forest Conservation Act, so I guess.
Well, they did.
old one.
There was a tolling
Yeah.
in, I think, 2014 maybe, or 2009. I don't remember exactly. But But that should be the example of how we don't do things,
Yeah.
to be honest with you. But I still contend that a timeline is important in even your amendment. Because as we've seen, this could be delayed for, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 5 years.
Well,
And that's what we've seen in the past.
put my amendments to the side and just,
Mr.
Are
Chair,
you-
I would rather we move to postpone action
Well-
until we're all clear, and that we have a document in front of us that is,
well, again, rip this up. We're done with it. No more amendment. That's it. It's too confusing. I don't want to deal with it. I want to deal with the original legislation. And that it's been on the books for now a year and a half.
Yep.
I'd like to see if we can get to some kind of, if there are clarifications you want on this, let's do it, but I'm not going to deal with this amendment anymore.
Sorry, I mean,
So let's just focus on that. How's the committee feel about removing that exemption for these old planned developments?
are
I,
you on page 3?
page 3,
Lines 30 to 32.
I was good with it, and I looked at the dates here. The Eastport Shopping Center has started in 16, or well, the last big action, I think it actually started in 14, and I think it started right around the same time, maybe a little after Crystal Springs, now Providence Point. I think those are the only old ones kicking around. And I don't think they're affected by this change on page 3.
No, they already have their final
Right,
planned development approvals.
right. So as I said, I was prepared to, we have more changes on page 4,
Well,
which
how
made sense to me. I was
does the Alderwood
On
feel about-
page 4, I'm following, on page 4, we're deleting all of 2 and
not, we're deleting,
Shoot.
we're moving up small a, up into, on to number 1, yes.
so little a becomes under 1 little a.
Yep, and B on the next page.
That is just
goes under
that's a
one.
reformatting. The black underline is reformatting.
So we've taken out 1 and 2.
The only changes are in red. Changes as far as new content.
Right.
And that just says that the project shall halt work until the appeal is settled. The planning commission also wanted on page 5B, line 7, they were recommending that it say the department shall require any forest clearing be halted. Right now I have it as may, so this appeal is the appeal that goes to, let's see, the circuit court. And so what I said is if, when the appeal goes to the Board of Appeals, that they should halt, make sure that no trees are cleared. But when the appeal goes to circuit court, this kind of leaves it to the discretion of the department as opposed to being a requirement. So I don't know if the committee has thoughts on,
I like shall.
You like what?
Shall.
Chatter?
Shall rather than may.
Shall. You're talking about in B, the department shall.
Look at what happened at Rocky Gorge where they cleared everything and it's been a desert.
But if you remember, that was a tolling that was pretty much required. If,
well, that was, the tolling was, but then when staff revoked, they reversed it and then canceled their reversal after getting an executive order from Governor Hogan, which said that further tolled. But then we were told by the law office that governor's executive order doesn't apply to the city,
but that, by that time,
but they still
Yeah.
kept their reversal of their revocation in place.
and that came from the planning department.
Yes.
So how does this change that?
If you change it from may to shall, that means they must stop any clearing until it's all settled. Whereas may, it leaves it at a staff
I was
level.
proposing may,
discretion.
but planning commission was suggesting shall.
Well, I guess my question has to do with the planning director, i.e. the department. What role is his decision? Is this to override the decision of the director and send it on to the Board of Appeals, or changing it from the Building Board of Appeals, or sending it on to Circuit Court?
For B,
Yeah, that's what I
for
was,
B is just to the circuit court. That's the current law.
just to Circuit Court.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for where, I know on page 4, where it says any person aggrieved by a decision of the director,
And that's existing code.
yeah, shall be entitled to note and appeal.
So, my sense is the thrust of your question is, are we going to trust the judgment of the director of the planning department?
Yes.
And that's what May does. And that's why I didn't have an issue with it. That trusts the decision of the director. If we say shall, that is no longer discretionary.
Correct.
Okay, then, because I believe that we trust in the professional knowledge of our directors. So if May does that, then I am comfortable without taking his authority.
It didn't raise a red flag for me either, leaving it as May. It was just when I couldn't go to that planning commission meeting, so I didn't get to hear their live argument. But Rob just mentioned they thought shall, and I understand why. There's some strong conservation mindsets, which I'm happy about, on the planning commissions. But my sense is I would like to make a motion that when this body approve the legislation as written with the changes on page 5 and the reorganization on page 4 and the deletion on page 3.
So
Well-
as originally written.
I wish the planning director was here. That's what I said when we started this meeting. I will second it, but with reservation, because I
Well,
would
we
like
may
to
be
hear
able
from
to have
him.
time to talk to him. Will this be on the agenda for Monday?
I don't know.
No.
No, the agenda's already been
All right.
posted. So we can get you clarification before then. You want clarification particular to Rocky Gorge, that property?
Yeah, and I don't want to target a property, even though we do have one that's in the midst of all of this. But I would like to hear how he feels this impacts his judgment.
Okay, let me look real quick because I feel like there may have been, okay, so you're looking just the other picture as far as
Yeah. So if we leave it at May.
the stay component, how that, what his thoughts are on that.
And as I've said, I'm concerned about who is standing. But that's something else we're going to have to address, and the timeline. That's still equally as important to me. You know, we're known for dragging projects out for years and years and years.
Can I offer a corollary to that, though? The Eastport Shopping Center, and this was when Panelides was mayor, were told that if they didn't listen to the citizens, this was going to get dragged on. And the citizens wanted some simple accommodations, and they didn't listen, and it has been dragged on and on. I personally think the appealing it on the adequate public facility wasn't the right place to appeal it, but that's the choice of the people who are appealing. And now it's gone through 2 rejections at the top appellate level. And so I'm assuming now it'll eventually go forward.
Well, I count that as one of the examples that things are dragged out and out. But we look at what was Crystal Springs, now Providence Point, And they listened to the residents, and to the point where the residents came to the table, they negotiated with them for over 10 years. 10 years, to the point where the Planning Commission could finally agree to the end product. And then this group appears out of nowhere, literally.
Well, no, not really.
Yeah.
Forest Maze was always negative. Laura Townsend and Julie Stankovic are newcomers.
Yeah,
to it.
but you know what? They chose to not be at the table to negotiate. They chose to not be at the
They
table.
don't want any negotiation, they just want to stop
They
it.
don't, they just want to stop it, absolutely. And this is what we allow them to do, and that's what I totally object.
I just don't see any way to prevent that from happening without infringing on people's rights to appeal. Because there could be in some cases, there could be very good reason for making such an appeal. In this case, there isn't, but that's where it's up to the judge. If the judge thinks it's frivolous, he can throw it out and dismiss it. I mean, but that's,
We allow this, and one option is to have the appellants pay the cost if they lose. Okay? If they're going to appeal it and drag it on, then the expense
And
of
that
that
may
should
well
be
be the
borne.
case.
they already do though.
Yeah. No, they do not.
They pay
In
for an
circuit
attorney,
courts,
which
if they
costs.
lose-
Yeah, but they don't
Costs
pay,
at least-
they pay for their attorney, they don't pay for the attorney that they've caused the need for. So that's,
Yeah,
there needs to be some
I
other,
think you need to.
That's
run
not
for
up to
House of
us.
Delegates.
That's up to the courts, not up to us.
well, I've looked into it, and we'll see. But there's got to be some better way. We give people an opportunity. If they choose to not take it, that's on them. They could have been at the table for 10 years, and they chose to not be. And when everybody agrees, then they want to come to the table and negotiate. Well, so anyway,
So we have a motion and a second.
yes, with reluctance.
There is a staff report from Planning Commission that went, from Planning and Zoning that went to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I
And
read that.
they did recommend the underlying legislation
Favor.
favorably.
And actually,
But I did have an objection to the staffing fiscal impact note, which says 0. And most of our fiscal impact notes come back 0. I don't understand that. Nobody's working on this, no time goes towards any of this. I think we need a
Well,
realistic,
This wouldn't change the process for staff at all.
so no staff time is necessary to pursue this? They don't have to
Out of
stop
the-
anything else and,
No,
out
not
of the ordinary duties.
when this passes, no.
okay, well, I
Anyways,
doubt that
you know we're
that's,
losing Julie also, the deputy finance director.
what about her?
She's already taken another job.
I know, I know. What are we doing? But anyway, I think everything should have a fiscal impact note because it takes staff time. And staff time is money. So we can pretend that it doesn't cost us anything, but okay.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, motion carries.
I should have abstained. I have to say, you have the, you
Change
have
your
the
vote.
most, you have the most obnoxious committee, Rob. Sorry. All right.
All right.
There's one down. All right, and all right, next on the agenda, we have general discussion. All right, we're gonna skip ID 4824 because the director's out.
I'm not sure. I
With
heard that
ID
right.
15624, which is
No, that'll
the
come
City of
back.
Annapolis assistance to implement O2823 gas-powered electric leaf blower ban. So staff wanted, so this came about because we received a few concerned companies contact us about the transition and the costs, and so the office misguiled decided to do some research as far as looking at other jurisdictions who have implemented this, as far as what kind of transition assistance they've provided. I want to thank you for the document. It's very detailed.
Yes,
You
thank you.
put out here a number of different options. I tend to concur with your recommendations, but could you give us an overview as far as what your recommendations, what our options are and what the recommendation is?
Yes, so the research that, Dylan did most of the research, and we pulled this memo together based on that, was largely based on what Montgomery County has done, our neighboring county. They're much larger than we are. So they did a lot of this with a third party implementing it. But Dylan also followed up with Montgomery County on their voucher program and the way that they implemented it. And that information is not included in here. And so he will add to what we included in here orally. And then also, Baltimore just passed a gas powered leaf blower ban. You may have heard about that. That was in the paper recently.
Baltimore City, you said?
Baltimore City did, yes. So we can also talk about that after Dylan goes over the recommendation that we made, how they're implementing it, the phased approach that Baltimore is taking in doing that, because to give the residents and businesses there a little bit, ease the burden, financial burden about transitioning to from gas to electric, and how they're doing it with their ban. We can talk about that after we get done with the recommendation. So I'll turn it over to Dylan.
Thank you. Dylan McConich, Environmental Programs Coordinator. Thank you, Jackie, for the overview. Yes, we were going over several different alternatives, including a receipt reimbursement program, a buyback program, which Hyattsville had implemented. And we had also explored the possibility of implementing the voucher program through in-house administration. So as you'll see in the document, we had recommended that we do the voucher program modeling Montgomery County's approach with the added third-party administrative support. And the main reason that we chose to recommend that program, or that administration of that program, was because of not only the staff burden that this sort of voucher program would have on the city, but it would also create a lot of different, it's just not a program that's easy for a government to implement without, what we refer to as red tape, those sorts of restrictions, whether it be finance restrictions or restrictions on making sure that everything is fair. You will see that we properly vetted this with the legal department and the Office of Central Purchasing. And they didn't find that the approach that we were making to the program was violating any sort of procurement rules or anything like that. Essentially, it would be establishing that there's different equipment that would be eligible for retailers to submit to the city for us to create vouchers for different residents and different businesses to apply for, and then they would go to those businesses and then essentially use that voucher as a form of full or partial payment. Now, I can go through this in thorough and explain every single detail about what that process might look like. But I'm happy to take any questions right off the
Why
bat.
don't you go over the recommended voucher approach that we came up with?
Okay,
So the limited residential support.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, let me see what the committee thinks. Would you prefer that they jump into their recommended action and go through that program, or do you want to hear about any of the other options that were looked at?
I'd personally like to hear what the options are first, and then we can decide what we would like to hear.
So why don't you give a brief overview of some of the
I mean, that's just me.
options,
I'm
and
the
then-
obnoxious one, so let the alderman say.
So
It's the alternates.
I want to be obnoxious too.
I know you have your turn. This is just my day.
The voucher program.
I think they're referring to the buyback and.
I like the option where
We're seeing
we have
alternative
the
programs.
We all have.
Office
I
of
would
Central
say
Services.
first
too.
do voucher.
Well, I don't agree with outsourcing it. I can tell you that right
I
now.
see what you mean, okay.
Okay, so.
You know, one of
You
these.
set the voucher program. So
Right,
voucher program
and
is
when we
different ways to
passed
set the
this, there
voucher
was no fiscal impact note that spoke to outsourcing.
Let me pause for a sec.
The fact, what we do. is-
Audience members, are you here to testify on anything in particular? Okay.
You're just bored today, and so you decided to come visit us. Thank you.
We've got a plan here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So referring back to the voucher program that we were talking about, there's definitely several different options that we can take to implement that sort of program. And this is sort of a matter of scale. So we can obviously, and this is our main concern, as per Alderman Savage was saying, we would like to go, or we'd like to recommend that we reach out to local landscapers and provide them that sort of financial support. Montgomery County had two different financial support options for different landscapers, and it was based on size. So for smaller landscaping companies, they were providing vouchers of $1,500 to be redeemed at local retailers. And for the larger landscapers, they were offering $1,000 vouchers. And this was consistent with about half the cost of the top of the line equipment that landscapers are seeking. And this would be the Steel BGA 300, which costs about $3,000 per kit. There are alternatives, and those alternatives are
What page are you
available
on?
for, sorry?
What page are you on?
Oh, my apologies. I'm on page 5, yes. And those pieces of equipment can be redeemed at the retailers as well. Moving on, well, I would like to say that that would cost probably about $30,000 because we have about 20 landscapers in the city. And this is on good authority. We have that information from the Anne Arundel County Circuit Court. And so we had actually gone through that list and found all the local landscapers, whether they're in the city of Annapolis or in Anne Arundel County. And moving on, regarding Anne Arundel County landscapers, we could reach out to Anne Arundel County landscapers and have them participate in this program as well. There are about 60 landscaping businesses in the county that are not in the city. And to be consistent with the amount of support we're offering the city and to save a bit on costs, we could open up that program to 20 landscapers in the county. That would be our recommendation. And this would, of course, increase the cost to about another $30,000. Now, we would recommend that the eligibility for those county businesses be set by demonstration of a significant amount of business in the city. We determined that a fair amount would be about $40,000 in revenue. Moving on, we could also expand the program to residents, and of course we would like to do that as staff. But if we were to open up this program to all residents of single-family detached homes who are most likely to use this sort of equipment and offer them the $100, which is consistent with Montgomery County's program, it could cost about $680,000 based on the amount of single-family detached homes that are in the city. And so an alternative to that function of the program would be to limit the residential support. Hyattsville was offering $50 to residents, and so we could be consistent with that amount, and we could limit it to a certain number of households per ward. We recommend 160 households per ward, and that would cost roughly $64,000 rather than $680,000. Furthermore, Montgomery County had set up their program so that they would offer support over 3 different fiscal years to the landscapers. And so we could offer that as well for just the local landscapers in the city of Annapolis. And of course, we could expand it to those 20 different countywide businesses. Each would cost, in full $90,000 over those 3 fiscal years, again, consistent with 20 businesses in city and 20 businesses in the county. And you do see that math all broken down on pages 6 and 7. Now, again, consistent with what I was saying about third-party administrative support, that could cost up to $30,000. And that's a rough estimate based on the amount of hours that we believe it would cost, multiplied by a factor of 100. It could cost as little as $10,000. That would have to be determined later on, likely in some sort of competitive bid. And then moving on again to those different alternatives, as I was mentioning earlier in my brief synopsis, we could implement something, and I'm on page 9 right now. We could implement something closer to what Hyattsville had implemented, and they referred to that as a buyback program. And in this breakdown that I have here, it's very consistent with what they had done. They had done pop-up events. And so essentially they were bringing in their Department of Public Works and then having people come up, have their gas-powered equipment. The city of Hyattsville had taken that equipment and then given them, I believe, a $50 check in exchange for that equipment. Now, in Hyattsville, they were not offering $1,500 to landscapers for more specialized equipment. It's our staff recommendation that we up the amount to the $1,500, consistent with what we were talking about earlier, just because that landscaping or commercial grade equipment is just so much more expensive. And you do see here that we have the responsibilities broken down, and then we have the pros and cons. And so one of the biggest issues with the buyback program was that it would be very taxing on staff time and resources, particularly Department of Public Works. And it's very time limited, whereas with the voucher program, it's able to be continuous over the entire year. Again, it's limited to just those few pop-up events. And so we'd have to make sure that people are aware of it, people are showing up, and for how long the pop-up event would last, it's dependent on that. We've also been informed that because we're not dealing with just the retailers, we would have to actually establish each individual resident and landscaper as a vendor with the city, and that's extremely taxing on Office of Procurement and Finance. And furthermore, while you're taking back the gas-powered leaf blowers, you're not guaranteeing that the money that's given to the residents and the landscapers is being used for equipment that actually meets our specifications, whether that be electric or whether that meet the sound requirements. And that's one of the pros of the voucher program, that we are only providing vouchers for equipment that meets the sound requirements and that meets of course, the requirement of being electric. Further, Montgomery County actually had explored a receipt reimbursement program, and this is here on page 10. And it's as it sounds. People could bring in receipts showing that they had purchased electric leaf blowers, and then we would just simply reimburse them based on that. It has some of the same cons as the buyback program insofar as, it's very taxing on procurement and very taxing on finance to enter that all in and process those payments. And again, it does not guarantee the disposal of that gas-powered equipment that they already have. And there's actually a risk of fraud that Montgomery County had acknowledged. At the very least, you could have the receipt, get the reimbursement, and then just go back and return the equipment. There's really nothing stopping people from doing that beyond fake receipts. And then, the Department of Finance would have to exercise some discretion over whether or not those receipts met that criteria for what's eligible. And then, again, we were talking earlier about the administration of the voucher program, but I can break down that voucher program much more in depth if there's no questions about the alternatives.
Well, let me back up a second.
course.
Before we jump into specifics. We asked you to do the research because I think we talked as a committee that we wanted to help provide some kind of financial transition assistance to companies as well as residents. The law is taking effect, was January 1st or?
January 1st, yes.
January 1st. So we only have about 2.5 months. Ideally, we would get this sorted out by the end of November to give companies or residents time to actually purchase the products. Now, I think we can do that because depending on what we decide today, we would have to do some kind of fund transfer, presumably from one-time use monies that we have, but that needs to be determined too. And then the fund transfer, I think only takes, well, it'd have to go to committee, right, finance? So we might be able to fast track that by the end of November, maybe. Yeah, so I understand what you're saying as far as and I agree as far as the voucher program over the rebate. It sounds like the voucher, if that's what you're proposing, right, sounds like it's easier to manage and we could still provide just as much assistance. And so personally, I do think that's the right way to go. The amount of the money you're proposing, I think, is $154,000 over 3 fiscal years.
Not including the third-party administrative costs. If we
How
were to
much are
exercise the
those
option.
third-party costs?
It could be up to $30,000. That's a rough estimate.
For 3 years?
Yes.
Okay, so roughly
Correct.
$185,000 for 3 fiscal years. Now, the other thing to factor in is we're already a couple months into this fiscal year. So it would be a bit less for the first.
Okay.
So I guess that's what we would really need to know if we decide to recommend this approach, is how much it would cost for this fiscal year, and then figure out where we can get the money and how to get that. So I guess the first question, it sounds like everybody agrees on the intention, but are there any questions over the recommended the voucher program? It would be targeting businesses, but also I like how you made sure that we had equal distribution amongst the wards. I thought that was good, but any questions on that?
I do have, my first question is why we're comparing ourselves to a county, Montgomery County, and of all counties, Montgomery County, which is the wealthiest county in the state of Maryland.
We're not comparing an apples to Montgomery County. We were just looking for examples of how other jurisdictions had administered programs, and we knew that Montgomery County had done this already. So we're looking at how they had done it, that we knew they had worked with a third-party administrator, and were getting advice on how they had done that, how they had gone about doing that.
So there are no jurisdictions, no municipalities who are implementing such a program?
We had not, in the time that we did this, found a municipality to get advice from to how they had done it. Now, Baltimore just passed their law, and they have given themselves time to figure out how they're going to implement it, because they have a phased approach over a couple of years. Their first year is this year. It goes into effect December 15th, but only with respect to the city itself, the city and its contractors. Then, starting next fall and the following fall, between October 15th and December 15th, the law applies to residents and businesses for that 2-month period, October 15th through December 15th of 2025 and 26. Then the law goes into effect for residents and businesses. So they have another year to figure it out. And then December 15th of 2026, the law goes into effect full-time, year-round for everyone. So they've given themselves a little bit of a runway. They haven't even decided what department they're bandying it about, who's responsible for enforcing.
Well, we didn't give ourselves the flexibility
Right.
of time, but I think we need to reconsider how we can implement this. Baltimore was, I guess, sensible in spreading it out, the timeline. I am not in support of following Montgomery County's lead as far as financial is concerned, what it's going to cost, because I think we can do better with other like jurisdictions.
How many other jurisdictions we?
And you mentioned all the departments, and I noticed almost, well, 3 or 4 departments have responsibilities that are being given to them.
Yeah.
And you know how I feel about assigning additional work to already full plates.
Right.
So we have departments, whether it's Public Works or the planning staff, who now are going to assume another responsibility.
Right. And
Without their voice at the table when this decision is being made.
Right, and Hyattsville is the other one we mentioned in here. A smaller jurisdiction, what they did was the buyback program. That does involve, the way they did it, they did the pop-ups where they gave money, they gave a check out for $50 if you turned in your gas-powered leaf blower ban. You can take that $50 and do whatever you want with it. But you got $50 for if you, so you're getting them off the street, but you're not encouraging purchase of electric electric blowers. Now, also what they did, which we wouldn't have to do, is they were recycling those gas-powered leaf blowers. They had that capacity to break them down and recycle them. If we did that, that would be an extra burden for Public Works or whoever did that. And
Were they asked, it might not be a burden if it's something they could utilize. Was Public Works brought in to ask how that would impact
No,
them?
no.
Or Recs and Parks, because
no, because we were just gathering the information. At this point, we were asked to gather information about programs, and that's what we were doing at this point.
okay, but that is, the buyback is one of the options
That is an option.
you've given us.
And then another option is the receipt program, where you buy the electric leaf blower and then you provide a receipt to the city and you're reimbursed. But these provide, that type of program requires a lot of work by staff, by finance staff and procurement staff.
I'm looking for comparison by cost, fiscal impact for each of the programs.
In the pros and cons, we listed where there would be costs to staff, where there would be time incurred by staff under each of the options.
What page are you on?
What?
So let's see,
While you're looking, I had another question on page
Okay.
7 about the retailers that would be
Okay.
included. Why the county retailers would be included at all. We have 2 city retailers that are included.
Okay, so for example, the buyback program on page 9, we've listed at the bottom pros, and then it goes on to page 10 with cons. And the same goes on for the receipt reimbursement on page 10. That's where the pros and cons are, I think. We have listed things for finance clerks, procurement, central purchasing, and then the same thing goes on with voucher program. That's where the voucher program, we go into more hours for each department. Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Alderwoman, regarding requirements on different departments and staff time, we recommend the third-party administrative voucher program largely because it is so competitive in terms of the tax that it would have on the different departments. It wouldn't require really anything at all from the Department of Public Works or Parks and Rec, and it would cost very little in terms of time from our office for the administration of or the Office of Finance or Central Purchasing, because much of the voucher awards is being handled by the third party, because so much of the payments to the retailers is being handled by that third party. And that's why, we're willing to recommend the slightly higher cost of that third-party administration, because it takes so much off of city staff. Whereas these other programs that are alternative do, as you're saying, rightly so, that, be taxing on those different departments. And so while, yes, it is based on the program of a larger or jurisdiction, we are actually saying that we're going further than Montgomery County, because they were offering a mix of in-house and third-party administration of that program. We're saying, no, Montgomery County was wrong. They should be using that third party to process the payments. And that's really where a lot of the tax is going to be coming from in terms of time. And so that's why we're recommending that program. Now, I can explain that further if you like, but I do think it's very important. You had a question about something else. What was that?
Let's see.
The retailers, correct?
We had one city vendor.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, you were including, there's two city businesses, but then there's a lengthy list of county organizations. The question was, why would we include those who are, was it 7 miles within?
7 miles.
Right. The reason for that is very simple. We want to make sure that residents have a variety of options. There's essentially only one, as far as we're aware, in the city that offers this sort of equipment, and that's K&B True Value. Annapolis Lawn and Garden, as far as we're aware, is closed. It seems permanently closed. K&B True Value might not offer all the different equipment that residents or commercial landscapers would want, especially the steel equipment that we were referring to earlier. K&B is not a vendor for steel. These other retailers, while yes, you're correct, are not in the city proper, serve the city community and the residents and the landscapers, and could offer that diverse equipment that would be necessary for this to be a program that works for everybody.
I guess I'm not quite clear on the role of the partnerships. Are they getting a voucher for selling the proper equipment, or encouraging residents to buy the proper?
I think I see your question. Are you concerned that we're offering financial support to non-city businesses? Because if that's the case, essentially what we're offering is vouchers to city residents and city landscapers for them to get that financial assistance. But these businesses, their incentive to participate is that they're getting that bit of the sale.
Or participate as far as providing the necessary equipment. Mm-hmm. Or do you mean participate in a different way?
They're participating and they'll accept the voucher.
Mm-hmm. Well, run an example through how the voucher would work for,
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
start with the landscape company.
Absolutely. So in terms of how the voucher program works, we would be establishing a portal for residents and landscapers to apply for. And they would enter in their information, my address is on Forest Drive, and I would like this equipment sold by this retailer. And what that essentially does is, once the third-party administrator verifies that information, they'll send over the voucher to that resident, or, of course, a landscaper.
So once they verify that the person is eligible to receive the voucher.
Right, exactly.
Then what's the next step?
So once they have that voucher, they can have it digitally or they can print it out. They take it to the retailer, and the retailer is essentially able to access that database and say, yes, this is a legitimate voucher, and we will take, a certain amount off of your payment for the equipment based on what was awarded by that third party. So if they had submitted for a voucher of, if it's a resident, the $50, or however much it is, then that would be taken off of the bill for the consumer. But we're not directly paying, we're only granting direct financial assistance to the person who's applied for the voucher, and we're reimbursing the business for accepting it. And so once they've accepted the voucher, they'll submit the amount of vouchers that they had redeemed that month for the third party to pay them in lump sum every month.
Pay the business.
Yes, reimburse the business for having accepted the
So the
voucher.
person has to go submit an application, and then they'll get some paper that says you qualify for this voucher for whatever dollars off of equipment. They bring that to the hardware store or whatever and say, show it to them. The store verifies, and when they buy the product, the store takes that voucher price off of the price of the equipment, and then we, at some point, reimburse the business for the amount of money on the voucher that they took off the price.
Correct. So if they had accepted 10 different vouchers, all worth $100 in that month, then we would reimburse that business $1,000. And again, the reason we've expanded the amount of retailers that could be eligible for this participation is simply because we're trying our best to serve Annapolis residents and Annapolis landscapers to get that diverse equipment that they might want. Since we seemingly only have one business that serves this sort of equipment, we would want to expand it out for that sake.
Yeah. Okay.
So one other follow-up, if I might. So does the voucher have a dollar value or a percentage value? And maybe you said that and I just didn't hear it.
It's a good question. It's an exact dollar amount.
It's
And
a
it
dollar
is-
value.
Yes. It's based on whether or not they're a resident or a landscaper. And our recommendation is that landscapers of a significant size actually receive a slightly smaller voucher of $1,000, just because we're trying to prioritize the needs of smaller businesses. So we would recommend that for smaller landscapers, that they receive a voucher of $1,500.
Thank you.
Of course.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this report.
Of course.
I do have some questions that are specific, but my overall comment is I think this report gets a little bit ahead of what I think is the most important issue, which is enforcement. How are we enforcing? Do this residents hear of gas power and call it in? Are we going to be, to Alderwoman Finlayson's point, are we going to be hiring more enforcement staff who will be patrolling the neighborhoods during prime gas power blowing, leaf blowing? And by the way, it's not just leaf, it's grass all year long, and they tend to blow it out in the street so it can get flushed down the storm water drain, even though that's not legal. But it seems to me that the things like buybacks or vouchers and so forth are sort of the carrot, but we haven't really talked about the stick, which is how do we get these people to consider a buyback or a voucher or whatever. And presumably that's because we're telling them you can't use it. And I do notice throughout here, and this is sort of a corollary, we keep talking about 3-year increments. I'm trying to understand, is that sort of like an allowance for people to use up the life of their existing gas blower and then converting? Or what? Because enforcement starts in day one, doesn't seem to have built in an allowance to use up your existing equipment and then convert. So it does seem to me that preceding all of this, we need to figure out how we're enforcing. What do we do on January 1st?
Can I say real quick before that, because we approved additional staff in the budget, but some of them are held up because we can't get this damn class and comp study completed and out the door.
Aren't you doing your review tomorrow?
I'm confused by the whole thing now. I was sent a half a dozen meetings, briefing meetings for this.
That's
class and
for
comp
each of us
study.
individually, because this is secret stuff that cannot possibly get out into the public.
I'm not
I
going to
still
comment
have
on
my
that.
top secret clearance from the Air Force, but that might not be enough.
That's
You
an
may
excellent
need it to
question.
get in.
Both of those are excellent questions, only one of which I can answer.
1:30.
So, as to enforcement, it was not, enforcement was not included in the ordinance, as you know. Enforcement was not included in the ordinance, as you know. We had planned for enforcement to fall under the city manager's office and be handled by resilience and sustainability staff, that third person, which Alderman Savage has alluded to, that was included in the FY25 budget, 26 budget, 25 budget. So I spoke to Director Jakubiak about this new ordinance and how we were going to handle that, and he stated that he had hoped that we would have that third person on board and that it would happen before the implementation date of this gas power leaf blower ban, because he feels that more and more environmental statutes are being passed and more non-building code laws are being, handed off to planning and zoning, and they're becoming more the environmental police rather than focusing on building code enforcement. And I can see his point on that. And because they are best set up for enforcement of building codes and other code enforcement and have more staff to do that, they become the default department for many of our new ordinances that are passed that require enforcement and inspections. So we did not come to a conclusion, because this was several months ago when this ordinance was passed, and we had hoped that the compensation and classification study would have happened, would have been presented to council already and passed, and we would have this new position advertised and hiring done very soon. But that has not happened yet. So we are at kind of a point where in 2 months, we will have an effective date and nothing really set up for enforcement yet. So we don't have an answer yet. As for what other jurisdictions have done, some have set up, just like we have for the plastic bag ban, where you have an email and a telephone number that you can call and report violations that are then investigated, and then warnings can be issued and then fines. We have a fine associated with this. I would take the approach where we would do a period of warnings first before we do fines. So, and around associated with education, to get people, make sure people are educated and understand, and are aware that this law was passed and that what they can't do anymore. What Baltimore is going to do, what they have said is that they're going to do their enforcement with taking a picture and a written statement that is submitted via email with an address associated with it. So then that can be associated with an investigation, and then a warning, and then a fine. That might be something we consider doing as well.
But the reason that I bring up enforcement, besides the fact that we pass wonderful legislation on short-term rentals and everything else, and then we don't have enforcement, is it would seem that enforcement would go well with, and by the way, we have a buyback program, we have a voucher program, we have a this or that, and it would seem like that doesn't have to be an either or. It could be all of these programs, depending upon the predilection of the people that are being enforced. But it does seem to me, if we're not enforcing, there's not going to be anybody coming for a voucher or participating. So I would think that when we want to start enforcing, we really need to be pretty well down the road of having these carrots to go along with the stick.
I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, if I could chime in on that too, is I really like, I think I can safely say none of us want this to be a draconian application of this code.
I do.
I think a grace period with warnings, education would be good. I know you've done a lot of outreach already, but there's still going to be a lot of people who come to us and, well, we never heard about this. I've had somebody, I think this morning, say, you had no public hearings on this. Like, Actually, we had a very long process. But in any case, I like the approach, I think you said Baltimore City, their approach of like, and I think because as we get people contacting us, I think we should maybe put out a press release too and just say, maybe if we could say in that, we're going to have a grace period. If people notice violations, just take a picture, send it to this email address or website, because that also prevents confrontation. And if they take a picture of the company or the homeowner or whatever, we can at least, at our convenience, go back and talk to them, educate. I think that's better than having an inspector trying to rush out to every single call that comes up. Oh, it's 9 a.m. in Eastport, run out here to do an enforcement. I just don't think that kind of enforcement, I don't think is going to be suitable to this type of program. I think it's better to have education lead the way.
But can I add on? I think there's pre-enforcement. I don't know whether we have access to a list of all of the different lawn maintenance people and gardening people, but it would seem to me that in this grace period, we ought to have a document that goes to them that says that this is in effect, we're going to start enforcing it. By the way, we have these different options for you to make your conversion to the electric stuff. And I think I know it's more administration, but I think more than one option is probably really going to make the program more successful. We will need to solicit the cooperation of the vendors that sell this equipment. And maybe they'll be gracious enough when someone's buying that honking gas-powered thing to say, by the way, you can't use that in Annapolis, and if you use this equipment over here, they have a voucher that you can get, or they'll buy back that old equipment from you. That might make this a more successful program. So I think there's a lot of groundwork we still have to do before we're ready to implement.
It may be possible that there could be some manufacturers that will do buyback programs that we can investigate with, companies like Home Depot, and see if any of their manufacturers do things like that. Yes, so there, as you said, there could be some legwork we need to do.
Are there third-party
Implementation.
vendors you mentioned as one of the options, a third-party that would administer this program?
So
Are there people who do that?
we need to find out what third parties there would be. One option is to work with the Resilience Authority, to work with a third party. Through the memorandum of understanding we have with the Resilience Authority, we can do work with them such as this. So I can speak with Matt Fleming about this and explore it with him.
But if they exist, there seemingly would already be working with jurisdiction where this is the new code, and they may tell us what they found to be the best ways to make it work. So if they exist, and I assume they don't exist for free, somehow they have to get some sort of reward for doing this, but they may have already done the homework for us in terms of best approaches, kinds of literature. I assume we'll put it out in Spanish as well as English. All of those kinds of things that are the nuts and bolts of implementing the program.
So we have put out flyers to the landscaping and lawn care businesses already in Spanish and English.
Over
about
80,
this
I
is
think you
coming.
said?
Sorry,
I think you said over 80.
was it over 80?
We had sent mailers to, yes, those different 80 businesses in the county, yes, and the city, just as Jacqueline was saying. And we also did post flyers at the landscaping stores that sell this sort of equipment, just notifying people that if you're buying this, just know that if you live in the city, the use of it is banned starting January 1st.
So can I suggest, I'm just thinking we do this when we put something out to bid, is have like if you send out another mailer that would maybe advertise some kind of virtual meeting in case people had questions, they could tune in. And in particular, maybe once we get the details of the voucher program set up, they can tune in and call and and make sure that gets rolled out. And maybe the general public could probably join that too.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
If we did buy back, what do we do with all that equipment that we bought?
So what Hyattsville did is they recycled it. And I'm not sure where they took we could find out more details about where the recycled equipment went, but their Department of Public Works ran that program. They broke it down into recyclable pieces that could be recycled, and they disposed of it appropriately. So we can find out more about what they did with that.
They repurposed the gas engines for drones, which go through lawns to see who's blowing.
To see who's violating enforcement drones.
So regardless of if we stick with a voucher or incorporate some kind of buyback or recycling, I think it's going to come down to, ideally, I think it'd be great to get this obviously implemented before just the start date for legislation before January 1st. But regardless of which approach, I think the price is probably going to be more or less the same. So the total cost, including a third party, and I do agree with the third party, because this by its nature is supposed to be just a temporary program, right? Hopefully we won't need it anymore after 3 years. So I think that's a good way to do it. We could always, I guess if we need to go longer than that, we'll have to talk about it. But in any case, if there's a general agreement on the approach and the finances, next step would probably be putting together some details for getting a fund transfer of some kind. And, now considering that the position has not been filled, we could potentially use that money for the time being between the start of the fiscal year to January 1st to help fund this program as well, in addition to any kind of supplement from one-time use, I would think. But I guess if you could get together with finance and get a fund transfer in the system, then we could have it come back to committee, back to finance, and then...
Mr. Chair, I still want to know what the amount is now. Can we not get the amount?
Well, the total amount was like 180-some thousand, including the third.
If you agree with what, it can be done so many different ways, and we just came up with this idea of a limited number of households per ward, extending it to 20 additional companies in the county. It could be done different ways, but if you agree with that approach, we came up with some numbers based on that approach. If you agree with that.
The numbers for each approach?
Yes, they're in here.
I'm looking at it on page 6.
Yes, the costs begin, on page,
Begins on page 6.
on page 6.
Well, you tell me what page. I'm just looking at page 6. I don't know whether I'm in the right place or
Yes,
not.
you are.
Yes. And if you look again at page 5, you can actually see the full explanation of all the different people who could be eligible based on different theories and metrics. However, when it comes to those different alternatives, as we were discussing, the buyback program or the receipt program, that would all be pretty consistent with page 5 to page 7. Again, as Jackie was saying, depends on what we want to pick and choose. Our staff recommendation was that over 3 years, it would cost about $184,000 up to that amount. In the first fiscal year, it would cost roughly $124,000, if I'm doing the mental math correctly.
Are you
Well, that's
understanding what he's
without
saying?
the administrative support for a third party, I think.
184 includes the third
We're
party.
having problems hearing everything.
Oh, my apologies.
Let me ask, I'm not seeing a 180,000 anywhere. I'm seeing A, 30,000, B, 30,000, C,
Yes.
680,000, D, 64,000.
Page
Yes,
1
so-
has 184.
You see recommended selection out of all the options they listed.
Okay, so letter D
For it.
is the option for 184,000.
Part of it. It was D and for residential
E.
support, and then E for business support. And then the third part of that is the 30,000 for the outside assistance.
And because we didn't fill that position, we've got 6 months of salary, is that what I?
Well, that's-
Or
that's-
4 months of salary to contribute to that? So we are looking for 184,000 cumulative
Yes,
For
over
three-
3 different
for-
fiscal years.
for 3 years, each for 3 years? 184 each year for 3
No,
years?
no, over 3 fiscal
So
years.
60,000 per year,
It's a good question.
61 something per year?
The first fiscal year cost, so we put out a contract for up to $30,000 to the third-party administrator of about $30,000. Then we're also doing the residential program in the first fiscal year. That could cost about $64,000 per our recommendation. And then the first year of business support, which would cost also about $30,000. So in total, about $124,000 in the first fiscal year. Following would be the, again, other $30,000 for business support, $30,000. And then the third year of business support, another $30,000. And so that's a total of $140,000 over those 3 fiscal years, yes.
So 61,000 a year. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing well today at all.
I'm
So
sorry.
what is the finance committee going to be charged with or requested? What's going to be requested? Just give me the dollar amount.
Yes, for the fund transfer this fiscal year, we would say our recommendation would be $124,000 in total for this fiscal year. And then furthermore, it would be probably in the budget for those $30,000.
So 100, so for this fiscal year, 120 some thousand.
Yes,
Would that,
yes.
and then only what, 30,000 or so for the successive fiscal years?
Yes. And again, because this first fiscal year, we need to establish the contract with the third party.
Okay.
We need to do the residential program, and then the first year of business support. And so those items for this first fiscal year would cost $124,000. And then in those subsequent years, it would just be an extra $30,000 to continue that business support.
Okay. So with the fund transfer, you'll just specify for this remaining fiscal year
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense.
with, I guess, some kind of note.
Do we know what the fund balance is now? So suppose this isn't doable. Suppose that there's less amount. I mean, this isn't the only program we have approved that we're going to have to fund. So suppose there isn't 120,000 in the fund balance for this. What would happen if you only had less than half of that?
Would you like to answer that?
Well, I think the priority would be funding the business part of it, because they have the most expensive equipment. And that's just my feeling, is we fund the businesses and maybe we don't fund the resident part of it. Or we fund the business voucher program and maybe we do a $50 buyback program for the residents. A cheaper program for the residents as a buyback.
So you would have a Plan B?
Yeah, we'd have a cheaper Plan B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, we'll just have to see
We see how much money we get and we can work with it.
what finance tells you,
Yep.
and then we'll deal with it in the next committee meetings.
No, well, the next
details.
meeting is next week, I believe, next Wednesday.
finance.
So I would suggest you make an appeal to the Finance Committee.
Well, let me know if you need help from me.
With an explanation. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what the fund balance is right now, so,
Yeah, I'm
So-
happy to help.
At my town hall meeting, which you both attended, thank you, but also in emails, there are several things that the city is being derided for. European trips, welcome center, e-ferries, drive-through windows, and leaf blowers. Let's see if we can get one of them right.
No, wait, you forgot houseboats, and what was the other? Are we just talking Eastport?
Is there any other place?
All right. Anything else on this topic from the committee?
I've got to go, Mary Ann needs me to pick her up at the hospital.
Okay, it's fine. The only thing we have remaining are, I think, report from your office.
And I did read the report, and it is very thorough, and I thank you, but I've got to.
Run. I thought you wanted, you're gonna miss out talking about ferries.
I know. What can I say?
You can go ahead. I think we're up to your report.
Oh, okay, well, I was almost 5 o'clock, so we did, we provided several new items on this report. We do have the pollinator park is kicked off already, so we're going to see some action there. The greenhouse gas emissions inventory and action plan, the RFP should be going out by next week. And then, let's see, the resilience plan that we talked about last time we met last month, it is nearing a good draft outline that we should be able to share with you at the next meeting. You should be able to submit it to you well in advance so you can look at it, and then we can talk about it at the next meeting. Those are some of the highlights, so I just want to keep you because you can look at this at your leisure and ask us about it at the next meeting in the interest of time, unless you have other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll save since it's 5 o'clock, I'll save my
Yeah.
questions, but I do think at the next meeting, I'd like to maybe bump this up on the agenda, because especially in light of, for me personally, in light of the Sweden trip, I'd like to dig into some of our particular climate work that that we have underway.
Yeah.
As well as digging into the ferry stuff that we've learned from overseas.
Okay.
But is there anything, questions for today?
No, I don't have any more questions.
So you want this to be the first item on the agenda?
Next time, yeah.
Okay, so I try to keep this as comprehensive as I can and bump some of the newer things up to the front. And we've got quite a bit of energy-related projects going on and grants we've been going after, so that I try to, make this something that you can, in a readable form, and you can just send us questions at your leisure and be happy to answer them at any time, not just within this meeting.
Well, I think you should mention, though, since it's October, the pumpkin smash.
Oh, yes, go ahead. You've been talking to Annapolis Green about pumpkin smash.
Yes, absolutely. Annapolis Compost had reached out to Department of Public Works. They wanted to establish an event during the month of November. They want to do this every weekend, where they're doing pumpkin smashing in Truxton Park. Of course, we reached out to Parks and Rec and said, hey, is this something that you'd be interested in? We had a meeting between all the different departments in Annapolis Compost. Parks and Rec seems amenable to it. We're still working out the exact details. Our office would mostly be responsible for outreach. But the idea is that this not only gets out outreach about composting to get people involved and interested in composting, but it actually relieves a lot of the strain on the bins that are at Truxton Park. So it's easier for Parks and Rec, it's easier for Annapolis Compost, and it's a fun little event. Annapolis Compost says that they've had experience doing these sorts of things, and so we're excited to get this moving forward. We just have a few little details to bump out, but it should be a good event.
Basically, go over there and take out your stress and smash some pumpkins on a tarp over at Truxton Park. And so that 3 years ago, I worked with Annapolis Green to get those composting bins established there. And we started it out as just a Halloween and Thanksgiving. It became very popular during Halloween to bring your leftover pumpkins to the composting bins. So then we extended it through Thanksgiving. And then I worked with Public Works to make it a year-round food scrap drop-off for the city, and now it's a regular, continuously, it's a permanent fixture for food scraps to drop off there in Truxton Park. And Annapolis Compost works with Public Works there to have that there. So, but when we have pumpkin drop-off, we add extra bins for that, but they take up so much room that we get all these extra pumpkins outside of it, and then people come and smash them. So by having the pumpkin smash, it actually helps because they get condensed down to smaller pieces and then they get put in the bins. So it actually helps us out in a fun way and promotes food scrap drop-off.
Yeah.
So we'll have to
And what's the
publicize that.
location?
It's right next to the skate park near the boat ramp.
That truck's
in that
been-
parking lot there. That's
Yeah.
where we have our food scrap bins.
Okay,
It's right by the trail, as you would go onto the trail. It's right there by the woods,
okay.
across from the
Yeah.
skate park. So we'll publicize
you.
that when we have a date.
Okay,
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
move to adjourn.
All right, I'll second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Thank you.